Hey, Lifesavers, welcome back to part two of Brian's story. In part one, we heard how a blood clot led to Brian's sudden cardiac arrest and how CPR and quick action brought him back. In part two, we're diving into the road to recovery and the powerful bonds he formed with the heroes who saved his life. This is the next chapter of Brian's incredible journey, right here on CPR Saved My Life. Over 500,000 people suffer cardiac arrest each year, and less than 10% of them survive. These are their stories of survival. All right, Brian. So we're back, and I want to talk a little bit more about what we just were saying in regards to this relationship you have with the paramedics that helped rescue you. Can we say their name?
I will shout out Alec Coscarella for sure. Not every hero in my case has given consent for having their names on here, but Alec has been just a huge part of my life since.
That's awesome. And so tell us a little bit more about what happened after that point. So we've gotten your pulse back now in an incredible way. And what were those next moments like?
For me, they were the same as the moments ahead of it. You know, I was still maintained in a coma for 36 hours. So I know now that pretty immediately after my pulse returned and they knew that I was just stable enough to get from Salida to Denver, I had my second helicopter ride. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to look out the windows on this one.
You didn't see that one, huh?
Yeah, but I was flown down to Denver. Like I said, it's about a 3-hour drive. The folks at our ER got my wife some snacks, some Dr. Peppers, and they just said, you know, you should start driving now. And so she actually left the hospital before I was on the helicopter. And I believe she actually saw the helicopter fly over as she was driving to Denver. But she's talked to me about, you know, like so many people, we watch hospital shows. We grew up, you know, ER was on. It was such a big deal. And the way we remember defibrillation working, you know, is like they put the pads on and say clear and then shock. And then the person just kind of, oh, I'm back.
Wakes up and I'm alive. And
so, you know, she has told me there were times when she just kept expecting me to be awake and I wasn't. And so she got to UC Health and got to the cardiothoracic intensive care unit. Shout out to the CTICU. Just love the people working there. And she showed up and the first doctor she met, she was expecting like, you know, he's awake. You'll be able to see him soon. That's not what she got. She got a very clear dose of reality. They said, you know, he was down for an hour.
wow.
We can't know that his brain, that his organs were actually getting sufficient oxygen during that time. And if he wakes up at all, he is likely to have such significant brain injury as to be a completely different person. And you should be prepared to not have your husband back, which, you know, a 3-hour drive of thinking I'm going to get there and he'll be a little bit awake. And one of the most, I guess, helpful parts of that is she did have her parents live about 2 hours closer to Denver than we do. So her mom immediately started driving from their house to get to the hospital. And so Kelsey had a little bit of advanced warning about just how dire it was. But you know, it's not an easy situation to go from, they're just these constant highs and lows in her life. And the trauma of experiencing along every step that belief of things are finally better. And then the rug just pulled right back out from under her every time. I mean, she was in a very heightened state of trauma from all of this.
And it's literally minute by minute, really, and so much unknown, which is what's real scary about it.
Yeah. So what she knew is that I was going to be sleeping still for 36 hours. The hospital was just going to keep it that way. that my body temperature was being cooled. I know from listening to your interview with Rob, he talked about the same thing, just to reduce swelling, to try to make sure that everything stays as intact as possible. And while I was out, they were monitoring kidney function, liver function. I had an ECG to just check for whatever brain function they could see. And there kept being signs of improvement in every number, but it was still just, like you said, that minute to minute piece. And so everybody who was there, my parents made it down. Kelsey's parents were there. They're just waiting. Right about just a little bit before we were reaching that 36-hour point, because they said, we keep medication going to keep him out for 36 hours. How he wakes up after those 36 hours is kind of up to him. Like, we stop the medication, and some people come out of it relatively quickly. Some people, it takes a while. So just don't have expectations, just be prepared for that you've got a long road. And so we got close to that 36-hour time, and Kels was exhausted. And so she decided to try to go get some sleep at a hotel. And my parents were still there in the room with me, just to be there. It's like they said, there was nothing else they could do but just stay close and just be there, telling me that, that they believed in me, that they knew I was strong, that they were hopeful that things were going to be all right. And, as unconscious, I can't say that I remember hearing it, but I know I felt that sense of community and of love and of family.
And so you said they kept you down for 36 hours, medically induced. And then after 36 hours, was it a gradual thing? Did they just say, we're going to pull it and see what happens?
As far as I understand, they just stopped medication to see what would happen. And my response was relatively quick, but Kelsey was at the hotel, and she saw on her phone that my dad was calling at 1 o'clock in the morning. And she thought, you don't get good news at 1 o'clock in the morning. But she picked it up, and he said, "It's Dad. Bri is awake, and he knows who we are." And Kelsey told me she could hear nurses like shouting for joy in the background, because just like in your profession, the nurses who work in these critical care arenas are used to people not making it. That's been another part of the importance for us of just knowing what the professionals are going through in these cases, of staying in touch and making sure that they know that the efforts that they made are what are allowing me to live a full, healthy life at this point. So I came back online, and I don't remember the initial conversation with my dad where I knew who he was, but within days, I was back to a level of clarity that I had not experienced since before my infection.
Wow.
So I can tell, I believe that parts of my brain were just like, this is really bad. Let's not have you be fully knowing what's going on yet. And then that gave me the sense that I had finally hit a point in recovery where my brain was like, you're still a human, you're still teetering on the edge, as we all are, but you're far enough away from that now that you can have your full consciousness back. And since then, just my ability to understand what's going on around me is so different and so much clearer than what I was getting after I came off life support and things like that. So the event was on November 10th. I had Thanksgiving dinner at the Garden Cafe in UC Health. I had just got my ICD placed, and it had healed just enough that they allowed me to leave my hospital room to go to the cafeteria to have Thanksgiving dinner with my family.
Well, you know what? I love a cafeteria food. That sounds magical. And again, right out of a storybook, because the fact that, you had your defibrillator, put in, and it's healed enough, and just the picture of what your family's already been through at this point, because it's literally been months and months and months, and just gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. And flashing forward to this picture of you and your family, I imagine you in your like hospital gown down with your IV drip. I don't know if that's the case, but that's what I imagine in my head as the picture of why I do what I do as a paramedic is to give those opportunities back to families. And it's not always the case. It doesn't always happen. But when it does, it's one of the reasons the nurses were cheering in the background, because those are the moments that we live for. Those are the reasons that we get up and continue to do the work that we do, is for these beautiful stories like yours, having Thanksgiving dinner after all of this in the cafeteria of the hospital. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. I would say you bring up Storybook. We live in a town that we have a mountain here, Tenderfoot Mountain. It has a big S on it, so most people just call it S Mountain. And the day after Thanksgiving, it is transformed into Christmas Mountain. So they put up lights that make a huge lit up Christmas tree on the mountain. And for those who are in town the day after Thanksgiving, there's a parade of lights, and then everybody hangs out downtown to see Christmas Mountain lit up. And so that year was the first year that my whole family, my sister, my brother-in-law, their kids, everybody was supposed to be here in town to have Thanksgiving dinner together and to watch Christmas Mountain light up. And I was expecting that to be the storybook. And I've told so many people, it would have been a magical moment for Thanksgiving. And because of the way that things went, we had the most unforgettable Thanksgiving dinner we'll ever have in the cafeteria at UC.
Sounds like a Hallmark movie. It's like right out of a storybook. Obviously, your journey is not over. It doesn't end with this, magical picture of you and your family having Thanksgiving dinner and your family being in town and it being coming Christmas and, a new event on the horizon. It's like, what was your recovery like after this? How long did you stay in the hospital? And how did we get to the Brian we know today?
So I got out of the hospital just after Thanksgiving. Kelsey and I again stayed in the Denver area for a couple of weeks. I guess honestly, actually closer to a month. We didn't return to Salida until New Year's 2019, and immediately started just working, getting back to somewhat regular life, doing the things that we love around here. And it was really hard. And my wife has, PTSD from this, diagnosed PTSD that she has done a lot of work on. It's a very traumatic experience. Anybody who is involved in any way with this kind of response, you cannot live through it and not be changed. So I went back to work at the prison, and I just found that I didn't feel whole doing what I was doing there. And I felt really connected to, again, I like I said earlier, I struggled with this idea of miracle, because people would say like, Brian, you're a miracle. And I would say, well, but let's take a look at all of the factors that went into it. Like, I'm really less a miracle and more just a chain of events that moved in the right direction. And people would say things that are meant to be really kind. And I know that, and I believe them in their kindness, but they just hit me so differently and in a way that made me feel honestly uncomfortable. People would say things like, God has a plan for you. And while I appreciate that meant kind things, I had spent multiple months by then in intensive care, and families all around me were losing people who they cared about just as much as my family cares about me. And I couldn't help but think, like, what about God's plan for them? Where's all of that? So between that and between just questioning what my purpose in life was, I left the prison in part to just pursue a speaking career. And I didn't know what I was doing. I knew I liked to talk. I still do. If you haven't figured that out by now, hopefully you're picking up on it.
It's the teacher in us. I don't know. I tell people all the time, I've taught CPR, I've taught, at the university level with EMTs and stuff. And it's like my own stage every day, and the fact that you were able to tap into that part of it, and go into what you're going to tell us now. And that's your advocacy work. And, I kind of know what inspired it, but what truly inspired you to, take that change? Make that change.
I think the moment of inspiration for really wanting to speak, really wanting to advocate, was that Kelsey and I went back for a follow-up in Denver, and then we went to get a coffee at a coffee shop nearby just afterward. We had, while we were there for the follow-up visit, we had stopped by the cardiothoracic ICU just to say hello, say, I'm here, I'm alive, thank you, to visit. We had, my wife's name is Kelsey, and one of the nurses who we've stayed in touch with most, who had been at the CTICU, her name is Kelsey Arndt. Shout out to Kelsey as well. And so we would just stop back by to see her because we knew how hard it was. And so we're getting coffee, and we saw a doctor who had been part of my case. He's an anesthesiologist who had been in the room when they were hooking me up to ECMO. And so he knew how dire things were then. And because of his work in the CTICU, he knew that I came back after cardiac arrest. So he had a very clear understanding of just how bad things had been. And when we were talking to him at this coffee shop, we said, oh, we stopped back in at the CTICU. And he just stopped and he said, I'm so glad that you did that, because they had just had like a series of staff suicides, because people just get so overwhelmed and so burned out by that kind of emotional work.
It's not easy. People often will ask me, what's the worst thing you've seen? And it's not something I like to relive. It's not something I like to talk about. It's traumatic. And I was going to say it's beautiful. It's beautiful to me that you found it in your heart to go to the place that you were at and say thank you. Again, those opportunities as a healthcare provider don't come very often. We do what we do because it's our passion in life, and not to get a thank you, but those thank yous, man, they mean a lot. So, nothing for me you did, but thank you for being that person, because that's the kind of love we need to show in the world.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. And that's Kelsey and I did it because we couldn't not go there. Really, it was like we were compelled. Some of the biggest trauma that she experienced was in that unit. And so it's not an easy place to go back. There is a disinfectant smell there that when we're walking back to the unit, it just hits her and it brings everything back. But she continues to go back all the time because she knows they need it. Because the doctor we saw that day, Dr. Sullivan, he said to us, patients don't come back. They leave. Those who leave healthy just stay away, and we never know. Those who come back, it's because they got worse. And so I realized I was that guy. I came back worse. And so it's so important for me to go back better. And after that experience, I found myself, I would drive by the EMS headquarters here. It's in Poncha Springs, which is just outside of Salida. But I was driving by usually a couple times a week. And I would look, and it's like, one of these days I'm going to stop in there, one of these days. And it's so funny. I was nervous, it's like meeting celebrities, I wasn't sure if they were going to be as excited to see me as I was to see them. And finally one day it was just like, dude, stop. And I walked in the doors, and I could hardly speak to the receptionist who was there. And I just said, like, the people here saved my life, and I just want to thank them. And so, of course, she said, well, nobody who is on your case is working right now. But she said, one of your paramedics, Alec Coscarella, recently transferred. He's now working for Salida Police. And she said he might be there. So from EMS to Salida PD is about a 15-minute drive. So I got in my car and made it in 8. Sorry, Salida PD. But I was like, I have to see this guy. I have to talk to him now. So I got to the police department. I went inside. I could barely speak to the receptionist or the dispatcher working there. And I said, I would like to see Officer Coscarella. And of course she said, he works nights, so he's not here. But she said, can I take your phone number? And I said, absolutely. And so I gave her my contact information, and I started driving away. and my house is 5 minutes away. And before I got 2 minutes from the police department, I got a call, and he said, "This is Alec Coscarella. Can we get a coffee?" And I was like, "Absolutely. We can get whatever you want. Like, you tell me the order, you tell me where to be, and it's happening." And so we got together at a local coffee shop here. I still remember I said, what do you have? Because I want to have it ready for you before you get there. And so he drinks Americano. So I'll never forget, like, the whole life, always have an Americano ready for Alec.
Paramedic drink.
But he brought along with him one of the Salida Fire Department firefighters who had been part of my call, Kathy Rorick. Shout out to Kathy as well. And it was incredible. We just got to talk. And it goes so far beyond the thank you, because honestly, like you said, yes, the thank yous matter. And I haven't met a single hero in this story who will allow me to call them hero. So I have to do it in forums like this, because they're like, "Oh no, like the other people, like, it's a team thing. And, none of us are really heroes. It's all the team." And I'm like, "That's cool. It's a team of heroes. It's a team of superheroes. None of you is going to tell the Avengers as individuals that they're not heroes. Like, just accept it." But I appreciate that they don't want to accept that always, because they do know how much effort goes into it. That day at the coffee shop, Kathy told me she was doing my breathing for me. The Lucas is doing all the compressions. And so she was providing breaths. And she said, "Kelsey was talking to you the whole time." We just said, just keep talking to him. Just keep his soul there. And at one point, Kelsey said something to me, and Kathy said my eyes started searching for where the voice was coming from. And rather than finding Kelsey's eyes, I found Kathy's eyes, because she was there ready to breathe. And she said, "You looked into my eyes," but she said it was like you looked into my soul. Oh. And I said, "Kathy, you looked me right back in mine." It's like that connection will always be there. Alec told me, he said, we walked into your house and immediately knew that we were in a family home. My parents sent my kids upstairs so that they wouldn't be around while the most traumatic of the paramedic things were happening. But he said, like, we saw your pictures on the wall. We knew that you were a family. And he said, we were not going to let a family lose a father that day. And then he said, "We cut your shirt off and we saw these staples and we knew that you had a healing sternotomy." And he said, "We looked at each other like, can we put the Lucas on somebody who has a sternotomy?"
Yeah, it's still healing.
Yeah. And he said the immediate reaction from both was like, if we don't, it's worse. Like, we have to see what happens here. And they did. Alec went on to tell me about the fact that they had actually hooked up 2 LifePak monitors together, dual sequential monitoring, and had basically shocked me with both at the same time. It was a piece that he had read about. He's like a paramedic nerd. He's just really into the technology.
It's not the standard yet, but we're seeing a lot of items in the research showing that, some of those things work. And just the simple fact that he knows about those things tells you how passionate he really is about saving people.
Yeah. And it was, for me as a teacher, to see somebody who is so passionate about, really their career path, but it's their field of study. Like, there was a teacher along the way. He told me that. He said there was a teacher who told us in paramedic classes, like, "I'm going to teach you everything, and none of you are ever going to do the things that I'm going to teach you." And Alex said, like, "I was there at your house that day doing all of those things." And, that's the great part about teaching, is he knew how to do them because he'd had a teacher who was willing to teach, and because he was a student who was willing to learn. And again, when I think about the word miracle, I really think about just the willingness of people to do the things that they can. And that's where that advocacy grows out of, is just the appreciation for the amount of people who were willing to just do the things that they knew how to do. They all knew that the statistics said the things they knew how to do weren't going to work. They all knew that the statistics said that I was gone. Nurse Kelsey in the CTICU, she said, I came in posturing, which, for those who don't know the term, is basically like kind of, I don't even have enough camera space to show, but like the arms are just kind of held out at kind of strange angles.
Yeah, it's a sign. They can either come towards the body, the corticate, or they can go away from the body, depending on what's happening. But it's a neurological concern. We see that with people who have traumatic brain injuries. We see that with brain damage is what that's a big sign of.
She said, I've never seen somebody leave with neurological capacity intact after posturing. She said,
It's a
you
bad
are
sign.
the first. And you know, it's not, I don't want to necessarily be the first, but I love the fact that my story can contain pieces where people can have hope. We had the surgeon who hand massaged my heart was one of the few people. So many of our doctors, again, not because of anything wrong with them, but because of the training that they have, they were very clear, you know, this is bad. Statistically, it's not going to work out. The doctor that Kelsey first saw when she got to the CTICU just wanted her to know the truth. My surgeon, Muhammad Aftab, wanted her to have hope. He said, the statistics say what the statistics say, and we won't know what's going to happen to Brian until it happens to Brian. And all we can do in the meantime is maintain hope that things will be better than the statistics. And that's what I want to bring when I talk to people, is to say, statistically, when you reach a half an hour of CPR, your brain's going to tell you. And my mom said this from her time in working in a hospital. She said, you reach a half an hour, there's no chance, like the hope is gone. But I went on for another half an hour after that, and the hope is there. It's not to say like I am a miracle, because people were willing to do the work to give me the chance to be a miracle.
It's such a unique perspective to have on that word miracle, you know, because it's really an umbrella of things that we know can make a difference, expressing the importance of making sure that those things happen the way that we know can lead to good outcomes. You know, and with things like the Lucas device, quick response, early recognition, early advanced care, which is all the things that you got that are within the chain of links, the chain of survival. And even, you know, they've added links recently, and that's good post-recovery care with things like therapeutic hypothermia, to make sure that we're, you know, for so long, it was just about doing CPR and getting a pulse back, which we know is easy to do. And I tell people this, and when I was an EMT instructor all the time, is, you know, I, as a paramedic in 2025, I can do lots of things to give this table I'm sitting at a pulse. That's not going to allow the table to get up and walk out and live a life the way that it needs to. We can keep people alive, but that doesn't mean that they're going to wake up and be neurologically intact. And that is the goal. The goal is not doing CPR. The goal is not just defibrillating or even calling for help and getting you to a hospital. The goal is what we are witnessing, you know, right in front of us. And not the miracle of Brian, but the miracle of what we know can be done in order to lead to outcomes like this. And there's situations where we do have those things in place and it still doesn't lead to good neurological outcomes, but we know more often than not it's going to. And that's one of my main reasons for even doing this podcast, is exactly what you're talking about, Brian. And that's, you know, I know what can be done. And as a paramedic, my passion has always just been CPR, because I love the heart so much. And I think it's fascinating the things that it can do, and the things we can do to it to keep people alive. And I created this platform to make sure that we can highlight those things that we know specifically work. And, you know, that's the common denominator in all of these stories. You know, every story is unique. Every story has a different perspective to tell, but they always end in what we know works. And that's those links in the chain of survival. And you're living proof of it.
And this is such an important platform for me to be able to speak from a survival perspective, because it is the team that helped me survive. And that's the team that includes my family. It includes all of my responders. It includes every person who worked at any of the hospitals in which I stayed, and the work that they do. It is that team effort. And I think one of the most important things that people who work these kinds of high stress jobs can realize is that team is there when you are experiencing the best of times, and that team is there when you are experiencing the worst of times. Like, I know from my own experience teaching in a prison environment, it's a traumatic environment. Some truly awful things happened while I was there. And I would lean on my team during those times for find joy, to find humor, to find our humanity again when when it felt like maybe humanity was gone. And I think that same piece is so important in critical care and in emergency care, is you're working with the patients who are closest to the edge. Honestly, everybody who goes into like an emergency or a critical care situation is closer to leaving the earth than people who are just walking around normally. And some people choose to take that call and to work at it, and they need each other throughout that whole process. And so, to find out that people, even just at a base level, are just burning out on it, I want to find a way as a survivor to make sure that the best people, the best EMTs, the best firefighters, the best police, the best paramedics are there doing the job and taking care of themselves, because we need it. I need it. I'm not here without it. And that part is what really matters to me about getting word out.
And how did you get involved with the public speaking and with the Paramedic Association and the American Heart Association and things like that? Tell us a little bit about, your passion for those healthcare providers and why you are now being an ally for us, really, out in the community.
A lot of it had to do with, my wife is a mental health therapist, and both of us believe that so much of this comes back to mental health. A huge advocate, not just for survivor mental health, but for human mental health. You got to take care of what you are feeling here and how it affects what you're thinking. And when we were hearing about how people working in critical care were maybe, struggling with that, she thought from a professional level, how can we do outreach that reminds people that they are worth it? And maybe does it at a universal level, but really targets the folks who are making these choices to work in such high stress, critical need environments. And from that, I just started reaching out to advocacy groups. It wasn't about trying to find a way to be, $20,000 an engagement keynote speaker for business. Yes, I want those people to feel hope and to feel love as well, and to be a part of the light that we're trying to spread. But I really want the people who are feeling like they're at the fringes of that light, the people who are feeling kind of marginalized from putting in the effort all day, every day, and not, getting the outcomes that would be the miraculous outcomes. And just to remind them that that's still coming. So I reached out to the American Heart Association to make sure that there was kind of that survivor advocacy piece. But reaching out to the American Paramedic Association has just been such an important part of spreading that advocacy. I've reached out to the American Association of Critical Care Nurses, and I'm hopeful to hear back from them. But that's what I want to do, is to find the organizations that are trying to make things better for the people who I want to inspire, and to find ways to bring that same level of inspiration and advocacy.
I love that. You guys are the best advocates for this, because I can tell my perspective and tell people it works, but to be living proof of it working is completely different. And I love that that's where you have taken your journey post cardiac arrest, and even led you to write, a book with your wife called For a While Longer. And, it's a story of your survival, of what your family went through day by day almost. So tell us, what inspired you to do the book and what that means to you and your wife?
Yeah, the book was really inspired, I would say, from multiple directions. So I'll start with kind of a story that ends up being written into it, which is that while I was teaching at the prison in Buena Vista, Colorado, I was teaching a program based on the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And for anybody who has read the 7 Habits or gone through any kind of 7 Habits training, during Habit 2, one is kind of meant to start writing and establishing their own personal mission statement. And I really struggled with how to do that. And I would write down long flowing paragraphs of information about what I thought I wanted my mission to be. And it just never culminated in something that was truly kind of a portable mission, something that I could carry in my heart every day. Fast forward from there to I came off ECMO. Kelsey's telling me the story of being on ECMO, telling me about the fact that I had a 50-50 chance of being on it, and about how my heart had stopped before they put me onto that machine. And I, had kind of the realization a lot of people do with cardiac arrest, that it felt like that was a point where maybe I had died. And a lot of people use that terminology. I did have a family member who works in the medical field who once said, Brian, in the medical profession, we generally considered it death to be a much more permanent affliction. And so I said, well, whatever, many of us who survive, we talk about the day we died. So when I learned about being on ECMO and I learned about having had my heart stop beforehand, I started talking about that with Kelsey, and I became really concerned about the fact that I hadn't had any kind of near-death experience. I didn't have any light. I didn't have, God come talk to me, no visits from family. And that was just a really important thing in my understanding. I thought I was supposed to get something out of that. So what I realized in not having a near-death experience was that I was feeling really concerned that maybe there wasn't a purpose or a meaning to things. So I was talking to Kelsey about that. And she, in true mental health therapist form, looked at me and she said, well, Brian, what do you think it means? And I was really, that question hit me pretty hard, because it was like, well, what does it mean to be that close to death? I guess really it means that, I need to think about what I gave in life before that. And I said, I've worked in some pretty dark situations, prison being the darkest of them. And in all of those situations, I have tried to bring a sense of humor and a sense of the joy of life to it. And I said, I guess maybe that's it. I can just carry the light. And I didn't realize it until months later. We got home, and so it was New Year's 2019. We had Christmas at the house we were staying at in Denver, but one of the gifts got accidentally sent to our house here in Salida. And so we got home and I opened it up, and it was a plaque that said, carry the light, and had the coordinates to our house. And I looked at it and I started to cry. And Kelsey said, what's wrong with it? And I said, there's nothing wrong. And she said, well, then what is it? I said, it's my mission statement. And when I left the prison, actually, our construction trades instructor there, Tyler Prosser, shout out Tyler, and his offender apprentice at the time made for me the plaque that's behind me here. So this is, one of my kind of prison gifts that I get to have. And it was so meaningful to get that out of the prison, because again, that's the place where, trying to carry that light in every day was such an important part for me to hold on to why I was even teaching in the first place. And so that was part of the inspiration for writing this book, was being able to continue to bring that light. So it's interwoven with a lot of stories from my own life, my own teaching experience, because everything about being a teacher informed how I would recover from all these cardiac events. And everything about recovering from these cardiac events has informed my teaching. So I wanted to include that. At the same time, as Kelsey and I were going through the process of our own recovery, we were seeing other stories. And my reading still hasn't recovered fully, so I don't read a lot of material on paper, but I would listen to TED Talks and I would listen to audiobooks, and Kelsey was reading books. And we found that there was kind of a common thread among survivor stories, which was that they were either written from the perspective of the survivor or they were written from the perspective of the care provider. And we just kind of thought, like, what if we included both perspectives in one place? And so to be able to say, as a survivor, my reality during my entire hospitalization, my illness, my recovery is ultra subjective.
Mhm.
And so I lived at times truly in a different reality from the other people who were around me. I experienced pretty extreme, although generally very happy forms of ICU delirium and psychosis. And for me, it was so important to tell my story because it truly is no one else's.
Yeah.
But it's also nice to have that more kind of objective reality of what the timeline was and what was really happening for everybody who was involved in my care. And I just think it's a unique way of being able to tie together the fact that we live in what we think is an objective reality.
Mhm.
But our own experiences absolutely create difference in the way that we experience that objective reality. And I think knowing that and knowing how subjective things are is why I can hear somebody tell me that God has a plan for me. And I don't get upset by it anymore. I just say, like, what I believe that person means by that is a kindness from them, even though it hurts me that apparently God didn't have a plan for other people within that statement. And I've realized that the importance to me is the intention of kindness, the intention of love, the intention of light. Because if we go into it with the intention and we have an impact that's not quite what we were looking for, if we're maintaining that same intention of light, we can come back and try differently a second time to have a better impact. I think that to me is a lot of what goes into the advocacy for professionals is the intention has always been there. I want to say on that subject of community, I know social media can be a controversial subject. And one of the most important things that I was able to do as a survivor was link up with other survivors on one of the Facebook groups where you and I ended up having contact as well. Yeah. And it has been so important to me. So any survivors listening to this, I would say look for groups that are, that fit where you need community. I live in a community in my town where there is unlikely to be another SCA survivor around me. It's just small enough that the percentages say it's unlikely.
Not likely.
Through Facebook, I have been able to ask questions, these existential questions of what it means to survive something and to be here and to hear other people's perspectives on that. And I've been able to give perspective to others and feel like I'm carrying that light, but I'm doing the work of being an educator and bringing my ideas to people. It's huge. So for those of you, and that's for survivors, it's for anyone, look for the ways to build community. And we do have a Facebook page for our book. So I post there. It's just, you can look it up at For a While Longer. We also have another Facebook page that I can't say we're quite as active on, Kelsey and me, but I would love to see people on there. It's called A Light We Share. So take a look at those and connect with us in those places. The big thing for me is trying to build community. There were so many meaningful pieces that came out of the story for me. And when I talk to people, it connects to parts of their life. And that's what I want to have in these social media communities, is to build that connection. The social media is a forum where people can start to drift apart and they can find the differences. Well, let's use it to find the commonalities and come together. It doesn't matter to me that I survived a cardiac arrest and maybe that's not something that other people have experienced, but we do have shared experiences. We've been in our communities working with other people, and we've had the joy of just sharing our humanity. Like, let's come together and do that. I think that's the piece that's going to make us stronger and keep us moving forward.
It's important for people to know you're never alone, especially in the world that we're connected in today. You don't have to be alone. There's communities out there for you, and knowledge is key. So I love that you're doing that. And we're going to start wrapping up. But Brian, I appreciate your story. And when we first chatted, I wanted to focus on your passion for first responders as a first responder myself, because what you've done and what you have continued to build relationships doing is unique. It's very unique, but it needs to happen more. So thank you, Brian, so much for all of your perspective. Now, before we go, I do want to talk a little bit just about your final message. What is it that you want people to know specifically about CPR, emergency response, and the value of being prepared?
Yeah, I will go right back to the idea that on November 10th, 2018, there were 4 adults staying in my house, and 100% of them were trained in CPR, and that is what made a difference. Their immediate response saved my life. The technology that came in, the EMS response that came in, saved my organs, saved my brain. But the immediate CPR response is truly what I believe saved my life. And so I received that response from the most important people in my life. And in working with the community groups that I do around SCA, every person's story, as you brought up earlier, Manny, is different. And the heroes that show up in the stories that we have are different in every case. I'm hoping that everybody who listens to and watches these episodes through all of the different interviews that you've got hears that they get to hear that the people who become heroes, they didn't necessarily want to be, but they were prepared to be. So get out there, do the training that you can do to save that life. You don't know whose life you're going to save, but you can't do it without having that training in place. So please definitely get out there, be prepared to do it. Continue to build communities. The reason that people respond is because they feel connection. So again, I was fortunate. My response came directly from my family, but also building the connections with responders who were not part of my family since helps strengthen their resolve to continue taking care of others. It strengthens my resolve to be a part of that critical care response, to be a part of that chain of survival if that opportunity is ever there for me. And realize, we have the Good Samaritan laws that are in place. The laws are there to protect you, not against doing something wrong, but really they're to protect you from feeling like you shouldn't do anything at all. It's to protect you from that fear of stepping in. They're not there because they have to be there from a legal standpoint. They're really there from like a moral, ethical standpoint to say, giving a response that you know how to do is the right thing to do. So find CPR training in your community. If you're not up to date on it professionally, get out there, make sure that part happens, because it absolutely works. No one can guarantee that it's going to work 100% of the time, but we can guarantee that it will work 0% of the time if we don't try.
Exactly. And with the statistics that are out there, it still blows my mind how infrequent people receive CPR. There's a lot of other storylines of what holds people back and inequities in trainings and things like that. But the information is out there. Take a class if you can. heart.org/CPR. You can go and find a class in your neighborhood, in your zip code. Go onto YouTube. There's lots of videos here on my page, as well as other pages that are just, things like hands-only CPR. Doesn't involve a certification. It just involves you knowing how to respond in those moments that are so critical time-wise. There's a lot of things that you can do to prepare yourself. There's CPR kits you can order online and have them sent to your house, and pop in a DVD and blow up your little mannequin and learn CPR with your family. And there's so many ways to do it. It's a gift that keeps on giving over and over, and it's truly, truly what makes a difference in these situations where we talk about cardiac arrest and survival and what we know works. And that's one of the main reasons my passion is there, is because CPR is easy to do. It's something so easy to learn, and it's super effective. And as long as we can get people to go out and act in good faith, like the Good Samaritan laws say, as long as you act in good faith, you are protected. And that's not even the point. The point is no barriers to jumping in and helping. It's like situations like Brian's, where we know quick action, immediate response, early CPR, quick defibrillation, and early advanced care, and good post-resuscitation care is truly what gives us the privilege of being in Brian's presence today. So, Brian, thank you so much for that message. Again, heart.org/CPR. Go online, grab your friends, do a CPR class in your living room at night. Play some good music, beat 100 to 120 compressions a minute. There's lots of songs out there. Make it a little CPR party, but do it. Do what you can to learn CPR, and not just learn it, but be advocates for it. Share the information out there. It truly, truly makes a difference and can definitely change people's lives. So again, Brian, thank you
Thank you.
for your honesty. Thank you for your vulnerability and your mission to give back. Your story and your family's story reminds us how powerful love, action, and community really, really are. And so thanks for bringing that perspective to us today. Anything else you want to share, Brian?
This
Go to his links, go to his community pages, get his book. These are all things that are gonna, encompass what we talked about today, and hopefully save lives.
And Manny, thank you so much for what you do and for having this forum as a place to have these conversations. For everybody out there in your community, it's easy in a small community like mine, when we have community events, the ambulance comes, the fire truck comes, just to be there on site. And I make a habit out of walking up and just thanking the people who are there. It doesn't matter that they were on my call. They are on a call at some point that is saving someone's life. So in your communities, please, none of the heroes that I know, like I said, they don't even want to be called heroes, but I'm going to do it anyway. They won't ask for the thank you, Manny, like you said, but they do appreciate it. Please, when you see these heroes out in the community, stop by, say thank you, go by your local EMS station,
Bring us
go by your
cookies.
local fire station. Yes, bring
Bring us
food. Food
cookies.
is great.
We
Absolutely.
love when people bring food.
I mean, whatever you do, when I see an ambulance drive by, I just throw up my own little peace sign at them. Just, I want whoever is behind the wheel of that to know that the community is behind them doing the work that they're doing. If you have never had a response in your life, good on you and hold to that. But also remember that just showing the love to those responders before they have to respond to you is something that you can do to build community.
Brian's story is a powerful reminder that survival is just the beginning, and recovery is made possible by the people who show up. This episode is dedicated to my brothers and sisters in EMS, the first responders who answer the call, give hope, and save lives like Brian's every day. If this story moved you, like, subscribe, and share because awareness saves lives. CPR Saved My Life is now streaming on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Follow me on Instagram at the CPR Dude and on TikTok and YouTube at the Medic Manny CPR. And if you haven't yet, learn CPR, know where your nearest AED is, because you could be someone's hero.